My answer depends on a couple really important things, a primary of which is like, how much do you need money? Right? Like, it's very easy to be like, hey, this is how you should do things and stuff. And then, immediately all these early founders, the money thing changes stuff. It's like, yeah, that's cool if you're VC backed, or like, that's easy to say if you're bootstrapped and you have an infinite timeline to grow this thing. So the money thing changes the answers a little bit. But if you have more money, you in less time, again, you just deploy that resource. If you have more time than money, you deploy that resource to figure these things out. I think first of which is talking to customers and learning how to do customer interviews. A lot of times, again, very easy thing to say, challenging thing to do, understanding a jobs to be done framework, reading books. It was very transformative for me to read. I think it's Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. Just learning how to interact with people using tactics like mirroring and different things to get deeper and deeper answers, how to go with like 3 whys. Yeah, but why, but why, but why, to really understand where that is. By better understanding your persona, you'll better understand the product and the solution that you're giving them. I already talked about offer design. I think that's a big part of it. But I think that piece, we're not talking about my world, which is marketing. Right? We're talking about like very core, how do I change the product to be actually the best thing so that this becomes almost like I talk about like the electric company, right? If your electricity turns off right now, you would do almost anything to get that back on, right? That's not a thing you wait. Well, if this application, if this software stopped working, how do we make it so that people will literally do anything to get it back working again? How do we make it that important?
I think when I think about product market fit, it's a really challenging thing to measure, and I think it changes as you go through the life cycle of your company. So for me, the first step is to get market messaging fit to an extent, because this is a really useful validation point. Are you getting calls in the diary with people you can even interview? Because if you're not, then there's nothing even to start with. And then as you go through that kind of validation, creating new hypotheses, this is really where you develop those initial personas, which you continue to iterate on. But I think you can test for product market fit in a number of different ways. Maybe you don't build any tech, you you concierge the whole thing. You just have something on the front end, and then you're in the background putting all the pieces together manually. And if you're getting people to pay for that, then you have a vision towards where you can take the technology.
I think just to add on to all that, I mean, I think there are, of course, to understand your product market fit, you need data, right? So I think being open to all kinds of data that you can get access to, right? So in the case of SparkToro, I can say that we had the luxury of launching our product to a pretty sizable email list. So we had people to share it with. And so with that, we did a lot of survey data, like sent out customer surveys, asked people what they were having trouble with, asked people what they liked about the product, and really dug into those responses. So that's one way to go about it. I think other ways would be, like Brendan said, learning the jobs to be done framework and doing these thorough interviews. I think you can learn a lot about many of your customers by interviewing one of them in a truly deep dive jobs to be done interview, where you're understanding what are the jobs to be done by your product, what pain points are being solved, what is the thing that people are trying to accomplish with your product. That will tell you a whole lot. And I think there's also, and this is more of a squishy thing, I don't know if it's worth saying, but there's also something to be said for trusting your experience and your expertise and making the right decisions, right? Like there are times when we launch something at SparkToro where people will say like, you should test this, which I think there's a world in which, on one hand, maybe in a larger team, they're right. So for instance, we recently launched registration for our upcoming virtual summit, right? And someone suggested, oh, you should add a survey for people who don't convert, who don't buy their ticket, to understand why they don't buy their ticket, which I think is a very rational, reasonable thing to do. But where I kind of pushed back on that was, well, I think we know why somebody wouldn't convert or pay for a ticket for an event. It's because there's a conflict in their schedule. You know, it's not at the time they want it to be. It's too expensive. It doesn't have the speakers or content that they want. It's going to be a mix of all those things, and that's true for any event. So what I kind of said to that was, well, I know we're going to get like a fairly equal distribution of all these answers, which isn't really going to tell us anything or help us make a better decision moving forward. So I think yes, gather data, do some interviews, run surveys, maybe even develop a customer advisory board pretty early on, so you have a small group of people who you trust, who you can ask questions with and kind of be vulnerable with. Because sometimes when you're faced with these interviews, you're going to get people who are like, oh, this is great, this is nice, I like it, I think it looks pretty, right? But that isn't what you really need to hear as a founder. So yeah, having a customer advisory board, but then also understanding the data, understanding the results, the insights enough to know what you can take or what you need to take and what you can gently leave on that table.